This is the best of the Regulars with Jordan and Colin on Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5.
Check out all the latest news, sports, weather headlines by visiting extrapeterborough.ca. You can do that. Colin, one thing, and I'd be interested to get listener reaction to this. MikeOrtha.com has unveiled their list of the top 20 most influential people here in the city. Listen, I don't want to toot our own horn, but there's a lot of frequent guests on our program that have made that list.
It's like they went through our guest list the last month and like, okay, this guy, this woman, this lawyer, Fleming College president, Trent president.
Sure.
We did half the work for him, I think.
I think so.
Dave Pogue's on there, too. Cracked the top 10, number 6.
You don't even need to look back that far. Last week, what was it, 2 weeks ago we had Jeff Leal. Last week we had Scott McFadden. We've had Pogue recently. We had a bunch of people on there. Rosanna Salvatierra, the medical officer of health, she's appeared on the program a couple of times.
Terry Guile, top 10 as well.
Yeah, he was on last week. How about Charmaine Magumbe? You want to talk about, we give her all kinds of credit here on the program.
Yeah, she was recently on the show, too.
Look, we're not going to unveil any details, Colin, but rumor has it, this is what I hear, you dated someone on this list.
Not dated. I went on a date with one person.
That's big time.
So that's a big tease. Out of the top 20, I went on a date with one of them.
We often embarrass Colin. I'm not going to expose, we're not going to say the name of that individual. But you can narrow it down because, you know, there's only so many females on this list. So you can look at it. Colin did go on a date with one of those
The one
individuals.
hint I'll give is she is not originally from Canada. She's international. Let's just say that.
Wow. Narrowing it down right there. It is 10:24. Let us know what you think. Is there any notable omissions? I see Graham Elliott did not make the list.
No, Graham wasn't on the list. I
That's
think he's putting in his time for next year, though, doing these Maccabia games.
Yeah, that's right.
Over on our stream. He might crack the top 20 next year.
I didn't see that. I didn't see Bill Juby on there.
Yeah,
I didn't see Scott Trewady on there.
No, they didn't crack the list. Well, I think the one glaring one everyone's talking about is she was on the list last year. She was number 2. Mariam Monsef didn't crack the top 20 as an MPP.
Yeah, even more, an MP.
MP, yeah, sorry.
I mean, that should be almost a slam dunk, shouldn't it?
So that was kind of the one major omission on the list. But this list comes out every year, and give them credit over at Mike Ortha. I mean, this gets tons of traction online and gets people talking and recognizes a lot of really good people in the community.
Yeah, it's just kind of fun. I'm wondering if there's not a bigger omission on this list. Where is Peterborough's personal injury lawyer, Brian Goldfinger?
Goldfinger, he's the man with the Midas touch.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
I got to say, I was very, very disappointed with the last time you were on the show. I was on vacation. I had a couple of days off. I missed you last time around.
You called
Brian.
in hooky. You called in sick.
I was playing hooky, absolutely. Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't come find me like the principal off Ferris Bueller. Come track me down a little bit. Brian, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, guys. I'm doing great. I want to give the listeners a visual. So I walk into the studio and Jordan is wearing a raggedy Indiana Pacers t-shirt from the 1960s. And Colin is barely dressed. I mean, it's probably, 10 degrees and rainy outside. Colin's wearing flip-flops, super-duper short shorts, and a deep V-neck t-shirt.
Actually, they are long shorts. When you sit down, for some reason, they give off that kind of vibe.
I want to let the listeners know that it's really not that warm in the studio. There's no reason for Colin to be dressed this scantily clad.
Here is the reason. Here's the reason. So you would love this. My basement apartment flooded when I got back from vacation on Sunday.
Sure it did.
It did. So I've had to move all my stuff, and I only have a certain amount of clothes that didn't get impacted. So really the only things that didn't get touched were the clothes I brought on vacation last week, which was all shorts, flip-flops, and T-shirts.
That's the equivalent of me telling the judge, Your Honor, the dog ate my homework.
Doesn't fly.
Yeah, those are above knees over there, Colin.
When I stand up, they go to the knee.
That's kind of, although above knees are kind of making a comeback.
Maybe I'm just ahead of the curve.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe I'm just ahead of the curve.
Maybe just a little bit.
Maybe you should be on that list for most influential fashion advice given to
I should
Peterborough
be on
people.
that list. I should be on that list.
Listen, we like to break down people's fashion. I'm looking at what you're wearing there over Brian. I've noticed you're a button or two lower. Is that kind of your summer style?
Yeah, button it too lower at the top of the dress shirt.
You're
Correct.
like Scarface's lawyer right now. Very Miami 1980s. So what's been going on? What have you been working on? Anything big?
Anything big? Yeah, we've been before the courts for something called the summary judgment motion on a pretty big case, and the decision came out. We were victorious, so that was very nice. But that case is just starting because we got more and more to fight, and we've just been talking a lot with people who want access to the courts, but unfortunately, sometimes the way the law is structured, you don't get access to the courts. So I wrote about it, I think, 2 weeks ago. Everyone thinks, in Canada, we have a free and democratic society, and if something goes wrong, you should be able to get your time in front of a judge and jury. And unfortunately, that's not the case. The Court of Appeal recently came out with a case where somebody was denied long-term disability benefits. They got a personal injury lawyer to sue their long-term disability company, and the long-term disability insurer brought an application to the court saying, hey, this person cannot sue. They're statute barred from suing. The only way which they can pursue their remedies is by grievance through their union and not through the courts. So it happens a lot, unfortunately.
Man, that's so bad.
Yeah. So you think you have access to justice. You think you can get before the court. You think you get before a judge. But the reality is, in many cases, the answer is no.
So what do you do in that case? Do you just kind of give up and move on? Or?
No, you should never give up. Anybody listening out there, never, ever, ever give up. Just because a lawyer like me or a lawyer cannot help you out with your case, that's no reason for you to quit. There are administrative tribunals where you can have your grievances heard, or you can fight with your union and really talk to them every day about pursuing your interests and pursuing your case and going from there. But just because you can't get access through the courts doesn't mean you can't get access through another method.
Brian Goldfinger, Goldfinger Personal Injury Law, right here on Talk Sports Radio. Extra 90.5, Jordan Mercier, Colin Teskey. I did want to ask you this. I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but what made you want to start your own law firm versus working somewhere else?
I'll tell you exactly. I used to sell paint at Sears. I used to work in the paint department, hardware. And I paid through college working at Sears. And if you've been reading the papers, you see what's going on right now with Sears Canada. And I remember I gave my heart and soul to Sears selling paint in the paint department. And they gave me a performance review, and it was very, very poor. And it wasn't poor because I was a bad employee. It was poor because they wanted to suck the most out of you. So if you're giving it 100%, they wanted 110%. If you're giving it 110, they wanted 120. And I had a chat with my dad, and my dad said, so long as you work for the man being Sears, this is always going to happen, whether it's your performance isn't good enough, whether it's your shifts aren't the right shifts, whether, whatever it is. And I always thought, you know what? The law gave me an opportunity to run my own business and to call my own shots. And I always wanted to do that because I always had Sears in the back of my mind in terms of how they treated me. And you can see how they're treating other people right now. You have retirees and pensioners, and at Sears Canada, they're going through a massive liquidation right now. And one of their arguments are bringing an application to the court not to pay their retirees and pensioners their pensions. So employees who I know, who I work with side by side, who are working there for 20, 30 plus years, banking on this pension, they're threatening of having that stripped from them. So it was always motivation and fuel for me to be my own boss at the end of the day.
Now, is it as easy as just I'm going to open up my own law firm, or what actually goes into being able to have your own shop?
You got to be good.
Well,
at the end of the day, like, you got to know what you're doing. So it's not everybody's personality type to do that, because you're a full-time lawyer, yes, but you're also a full-time business person. And if you don't have the business savvy or the confidence in yourself to run your own business, you're not going to succeed. You have to be willing to take risks, and you have to go with the punches and go with the flow. It's not for everybody, but if you can do it, go for it. And that's just not for law. That's for anything, whether it's accounting, whether it's running your own business. If you want to own a hot dog stand or an ice cream shop, believe in yourself and go for it. And the worst thing that can happen is you fail, and that's bad, but you got to be able to dust yourself up, get off your feet, and move along.
I think that's so important, though, Brian, because a lot of people, I think, would rather work for themselves.
Yeah.
But not everyone has that in them to go out and do that. And to be an entrepreneur, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that some people don't realize right away. They see that light, but they don't realize all the work that has to go into it.
That's right. If anyone takes anything from that story, number one, believe in yourself. Number two, Sears is a terrible, terrible company. Terrible. And I want to know if there's any listeners out there who used to work at Sears and who are going through kind of being laid off. My empathies are with them. I was right with you on the trenches in terms of working. They're a very difficult employer to have, and what the public is seeing now is kind of what people had to deal with for many, many, many years.
You were listening to the Regulars here, Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5, proudly presented by Sears Canada here on Extra 90.5. Brian, it's funny you mentioned balancing being a lawyer versus being a business person. Now, did you always have business savvy, or was that an area that needed to be developed a little bit?
I don't know. I just I don't have any crazy entrepreneurial stories for you from, say, my undergrad or being in law school where I was going around, selling socks out of the trunk of my car, things like that. Like Mark Cuban has these great stories where he's going door to door selling, socks or other goods. I don't have those stories, but I can tell you just by virtue of the way I was treated, it really fueled my fire and my motivation to do so. A few other anecdotes maybe. Also, when I was working at a law firm downtown on Bay Street, one of the important things was putting in your hours and FaceTime. So it would be 5 or 6 o'clock, and if there's no more work to be done, you want to go home at the end of the day. But being a young lawyer, if the partners who you're working for aren't going home, you can't go home. And I never really liked that feeling of being shamed for leaving the office at a certain hour when your work was essentially done for the day. And I also never liked the feeling of 6 o'clock getting a phone call or getting an email saying we have an emergency, and it's essentially the partner's laziness becoming your emergency. So somebody else's problem or somebody else's laziness or somebody else's lack of attention to detail becoming my headache and affecting, the way I live my life. And I never liked that either.
Do you remember the first case that you ever took on?
I do, of course. The first case I ever took on my own with my own law firm was the case of a Brazilian wax gone bad. So it was a young woman.
No way.
Yeah, way. It was a young woman before her honeymoon. She went in and she got a Brazilian done. It was her first time getting a Brazilian done. And for those of you listeners who don't know what a Brazilian is, just look it up online. And
Colin, you want to type that in over there? Maybe go to Google Images. Too,
no, I already got the image. Don't worry.
So she goes in for her waxing, and it goes terribly wrong, such that she requires 3 sutures or stitches in that area because the waxer was a bit too aggressive. So she's on her honeymoon, and she can't enjoy her honeymoon to the fullest with her betrothed because of this Brazilian gone bad. And the case ended up settling out of court, thank goodness. And we got this woman the compensation which she deserved, but it was certainly a very memorable case.
I was going to say, if you're going to start, why not start right there with a Brazilian wax gone bad? Pretty impressive stuff. Extra 90.5. You're listening to the Regulars here, Jordan Mercier alongside Colin Teskey. Now, Brian, we have you in here. We know you're a huge basketball. You already probed me a little bit about Paul George leaving the Indiana Pacers. But the Toronto Raptors specifically, Damari Carroll no longer there. They parted ways with Corey Joseph. What do you make of some of the moves that have happened over the last number of weeks?
I love them. So the Raptors, and I find that's in basketball, it's the idea of a certain player. So when they signed Damari Carroll, I love that signing because the idea of a 3-and-D player who brings leadership, who came from a winning culture in Atlanta. I love that idea. And we've always been trying to fit that 3 swingman who could guard multiple positions. It was supposed to be Terrence Ross, but he lacked the mental capacity to do it. Before Terrence Ross, we had a player named Rasul Butler. Do you remember that guy?
Yeah. Yep.
Rasul Butler. And he was like 6'7", 6'8", long wingspan, could guard multiple positions, could shoot the 3. He was a veteran. Rasul Butler was a hot, stinking pile of garbage. Okay? We've never been able to fill that position. So we paid Damari Carroll a lot of money, and he was supposed to work out. That idea of him, it seemed right. It never worked out in practice. So the fact that we were able to unload Damari Carroll for essentially a protected first-round pick, which is basically a 15th or 16th pick and beyond, and a second-round pick is basically nothing. If you go through the history of the draft and you look at players drafted 16 and beyond, there aren't that many All-Stars. I think at last reading, the only All-Star in the last 5 years picked over the 16th pick. Can you guys guess in the past 5 years who it was?
Draymond Green, right? Because he was in the second round.
It's second round. I'm talking first round.
Oh, in the first round. No, I can't name you one.
The Greek Freak?
The guy is from your team, your epic team, the Utah Jazz.
Oh, okay.
One of the teams you like.
Gilbert?
Yeah, that's him.
Or Gobert. Sorry,
Gobert. That's
Gobert.
the one.
Wow.
So those picks, I mean, it's hit or miss, right? So I think it's like 80% of the time you're going to miss on that pick. I'm not saying that pick won't be a starting player in the NBA and won't be a serviceable player, but the chances of that pick, 16 and beyond, being an all-star are pretty slim. So I'll take my chances.
What did you make about his comments leaving, where he kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't... I guess he passed the buck a little bit in terms of the system and playing the isolation ball and felt like maybe he wasn't put in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. The Raptors system is too stagnant. Their offense is too stagnant, but it's built around DeMar and Kyle. And if DeMar and Kyle are going to play iso ball, that's what's going to happen. And DeMar is not an iso ball player. That, again, falls on the coaching staff. They have to implement a proper system whereby they're putting all of their players, not just two, in the best positions to succeed. And my hope is that in this offseason, they're able to implement a better offense and realize the flaws of their ways in the past, such that we have a bit more flow in the offense.
Well, when you look at what Masai Ujiri was saying after the season, Brian, he's talked about a culture reset and kind of what you're elaborating on too, and that he wants the ball to move around a little bit more. Is Dwayne Casey going to be able to adapt to that, do you think, in the offseason?
I hope he is. And the idea of Dwayne Casey, again, it's a great idea. He's the most winningest coach in Raptor history. I love that idea, but the implementation... I haven't seen it in the past. I'm hopeful it'll be there. My gut is telling me no. My gut is telling me he's not the coach for the long haul. And just my gut also tells me that him and Kyle have butted heads in the past, and I don't see that changing in the long haul. So we'll wait and see. But again, my gut is telling me no.
What do you make about the competitive imbalance that is not a new thing, but I think we're seeing it at maybe a new level? You talk about two of the best players in the Eastern Conference have already departed for the Western Conference, that being Jimmy Butler and Paul George. I'm not sure if you're the NBA how exactly you deal with it. They already said that they have ruled out, at least in the short term, a balanced schedule because they were worrying about travel concerns, particularly for those on the coast. But is this an issue as somebody who's a fan?
Yeah, it is, because I'm a fan of competitive basketball, and I don't know about you guys, but the NBA playoffs this year, they were the most lackluster playoffs I can recall.
Yep.
Normally, the NBA deals excitement. They failed to deal excitement this time around, and that's a concern when going into the season, you get the feeling it's just going to be Cleveland, Golden State again, and then next year, when Paul George leaves Oklahoma City to go to the Lakers, and then when LeBron James conveniently comes to the Lakers and brings with him maybe a John Wall, who didn't sign for the Supermax in Washington, which is a big note, and maybe also brings with him DeMarcus Cousins because they're buddies, there's a lack of balance, and you want to be with the cool kids, and I feel in Toronto, we're not as cool as maybe LeBron or Paul George or Chris Paul or those guys. So the NBA should do something. I think perhaps eliminating Eastern Conference, Western Conference might be a start.
1 through 16?
Right? And maybe having a play-in for the playoffs for the last few teams. There's a few competitive things that they can tweak and work with. I think that's where, soccer in England has an edge, because the bottom 2 or 4 teams in the Premiership, they get relegated, whatever it is. I'm not such a big soccer expert.
Relegated, right?
Yeah. So they got to play in Tier 2, and now we don't have relegation in the NBA, but perhaps there are other penalties we can put on teams that lose or tank on purpose, like the Sixers have for years.
Do you look back at the decision when LeBron leaves Cleveland for Miami? Do you pinpoint that as the moment where all of a sudden there was this new culture of superstars who didn't necessarily want to be the guy? Because that was kind of Reggie Miller's comment to Paul George when he left Indiana. He said a king should never leave his kingdom unless he's forced out. But you're seeing that more and more, that everybody just wants to join together, create these super teams. And again, they're good for talking points. I think it'll go stale pretty quick when you realize somebody like me or you, we cheer for these teams where you're going into a season saying, oh, it'd be great if we could make the conference finals. Like, you're not even thinking about an NBA championship anymore.
I'd love to get an uber mind like Malcolm Gladwell do a socio-economic competitive analysis or study based on the mindset of the players in today's generation versus the mindset of the players when the Magic and Bird and early Michael Jordan days. And I think it's a combination of a lot of things. It's money, legacy, media, upbringing, whatever it is. I feel like the mindset is different, but I need an uber mind like Malcolm Gladwell to really do a deep dive and analyze that.
Well, and I know a lot of people say, well, before LeBron did that, the Celtics had their super team, but the difference was that Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett had put in many years with different teams trying to be the guy, and they were on the back half of what their career was. They weren't entirely in their prime. And I think that's a distinct difference than when LeBron and Chris Bosh decided to go to Miami.
Well, that Boston difference, too, I thought that they were brought together. Paul Pierce was already there, and then there were trades involved, from what I recall.
That's right, yes.
And I don't think it was a conscientious, hey, let's all have a meeting in Miami, and we're all going to collude to accept less dollars to go to Miami, as opposed to Boston orchestrating the deal. And also, what needs to be taken into consideration making these super teams, the teams in Florida and Texas have a comparative advantage versus the teams, all the other NBA teams, because there's no state tax in those two states. So players, Uber players, these superstars can go in and earn less on a contract, but actually make as much because they're not paying that state tax.
Interesting. I think something else you pointed out too, Colin, I like this move, eliminating some of the timeouts. I didn't realize they had so many timeouts.
Brian, I didn't realize they had 18 timeouts. I've watched a lot of basketball, but it never occurred to me they have that many. So even 14 to me seems ridiculous, but to me it's still a step in the right direction.
How many timeouts do you get in a lacrosse game?
That's a good question too.
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners are screaming right now because they know, but there's a lot. I'm trying to think. I don't know.
I know you get one in hockey.
One in hockey. One in hockey. Why do you need 14 in basketball?
I don't know.
Well, here's what I always used to say. I said, if you can waste a timeout because you're scrambling for possession or you're falling out or you're just trying to take an illegal defense so you can see what the other setup is, that means that they are way too indispensable. Like if some guy in the first quarter scrambles on the floor and is like, timeout, 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 and you can blow them that easily, then you have way, way too many.
My old high school coach used to call, I think you got like 3 timeouts in a high school game, something like that. And he'd see something bad, and he'd call 3 consecutive timeouts. So after the first timeout, the ref would come by, and he'd say, all right, let's play. He goes, no, I'm taking another one. And then we take the other timeout, and then the ref would come by. He's like, are you ready to go? No, I'm taking another one. And it'd be like a 5-minute block, whatever it is, just waiting around. Yeah.
Give a 30. Give a 30 over here. Brian Goldfinger Personal Injury Law, joining us here on the Regulars Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5. Time always flies when you are here. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and inquire about your services, Brian, how can they go about doing that?
You can visit the website at goldfingerlaw.com or email me at Brian, BRIAN, at goldfingerlaw.com.
That's perfect. Will you come back soon?
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. We'll post that information too on our website, extrapeterborough.ca. That's our man, Brian Goldfinger.
You are a clever, resourceful man, Mr. Bond. Well, thank you. Perhaps too clever.
Yeah.
This is the best of the regulars on Talk Sports Radio, Extra 90.5.